Hey guys, have you ever wanted to make money? Well, apparently dying in video games is getting pretty popular, and seeing that people are constantly trying to make the in-game experiences more and more realistic, I thought of the perfect invention. So I am happy to introduce the oven. Stick your head in it.
Oh boy, hard games. There's nothing wrong with making a game difficult, but some games, man. Oh no. Every now and then you get a game that just destroys your self-esteem. Dark Souls, Cuphead, Elmo's A to Z Adventure for the Nintendo Wii. All these games probably come to your head when you think of a hard video game. But while a lot of these games are pretty recent, a lot of the most difficult games debuted in the 1980s. Okay, flashback, it's the mid-80s, you're young and hanging out at your local arcade eating meat-flavoured pizza, while some song is playing over a shitty speaker. You know, 80s stuff. But in the corner of your eye you spot something magical. The Tapper arcade game. So you decide, well, I'm gonna mosey down onto that cabinet and experience some bartending action. But oh no, fuckface, you see the game's difficult. But you want to keep playing, so you put another quarter in to keep playing. And then another one. And then another one, until you wake up the next morning with no recollection of last night and no money in your piggy bank. You see, this was all a really long-winded way of explaining that video game companies had to rely on making difficult video games back in the era of arcade cabinets to increase profits, because you see, the more you lose, the more greasy quarters they get from 12-year-old boys trying to impress the girl across the street named Sandy. You know, 80s stuff. Now, when Nintendo started to bring gaming back into the house with the NES, the act of purposely trying to make games hard never really stopped. Due to the fact that children only really had one game to fill a summer, combined with the fact that NES cartridges couldn't really fit storage, also combined with the fact that games of that era couldn't really save their progress, well, it made for a lot of sad children. But with the evolution of games becoming more advanced and more accepted, games became easier and easier, eventually to the point where if a really hard game came out, it would be treated as some sort of rare event. Thus coining the term the Dark Souls of blank. Dark Souls being the only real hard game in the wave of Kirby's epic yarns, this phrase became more and more common. The Dark Souls of platforming, the Dark Souls of roguelikes, the Dark Souls of ant simulators. It's everywhere nowadays, which is getting stranger and stranger because, thanks to the help of indie developers, there's a lot more hard games than there were just 10 years ago. Which is great if you like hard games. And me? I like them. So now that I've talked about the history of everything returning to the word hard, let's talk about what makes a game hard and a couple notable examples of a hard game. Now the most notable design of a hard game is the quick inputs, which is why platformers are usually the most popular candidates for hard games. The most notable example of a hard platformer though is probably Super Meat Boy. That is, if you don't look at Cuphead as a platformer. So why is Super Meat Boy regarded as one of the hardest platformers out there? Well, it's hard. It's really hard. For me though, it almost didn't feel hard. You see, every time you die in Super Meat Boy, you respawn. In like a second. And considering how short the levels are, you almost don't get enough time to grieve your death. Because by the time you're done, look at that, you're alive again. Contrast that to something like Donkey Kong Country 2. Sure, maybe it's not the hardest game in the world, but the punishment for death can be pretty harsh sometimes. Not only does it take 9 seconds to start the stage up again, but you have to get back to your checkpoint, which can take up to 3 minutes. In that time you could have beaten 3 much harder Super Meat Boy levels. This being said, not every game can be Super Meat Boy. I understand that every game goes at its own pace, but a minute or so can be the difference between someone enduring and someone quitting in rage. But of course, platformers aren't the only genre that encompasses hard games. Any genre can have a hard game, but there are certain genres that really encompass a lot of strategy, like multiplayer games. But here's where it kinda gets into a grey area. How do you define a hard game? Well, for me, if the game can be categorized with the letters R, P, and G, that's a good sign to pack up and go home, because I'm not even gonna try and spend 50 hours of my life learning to play a game. A genre commonly associated with being difficult is the fighting game genre, also known as the I can beat a level 3 Kirby in Smash Bros, but there's no fucking way I'm going near the online mode in Street Fighter V. When it comes to fighting games, they're usually pretty easy to pick up, but difficult to master. And by difficult to master, I mean... Another way to make a multiplayer game hard is instead of having 2 people brawling it out or 4 people trying to survive, You put 100 people in a game and watch what the Holocaust was probably like. Yes, the Battle Royale, the genre that has spawned many a divorce. And I can see why. Lose one too many games of Apex and you're bound to turn into a raging alcoholic. This is probably the hardest multiplayer genre. Instead of having to be better than one person, you have to be better than 99 people. And that's a pretty tall order. And when most Battle Royales decide to be shooters, someone who's mediocre at shooters, like me, can't exactly beat 100 people in a colourful deathmatch. But hey, I'm pretty good at Tetris, so Tetris 99 might be more up my alley. Now, when talking about hard games, I haven't really mentioned the most obvious contender. Dark Souls. I haven't played Dark Souls, but I have played Bloodborne, and as we like to say in the industry, that's good enough. Now, a lot of hard games usually are pretty deceiving. They usually have a bright, colourful art style to contrast the harsh difficulty. Not Bloodborne. One look at this game and you're sure to feel an overwhelming sense of dread, and that sense of dread really never goes away. On a tier list of horror games, this would definitely rank as close enough. The way some of these enemies are placed can give you a decent spook sometimes. Honestly, some of these enemy placements are just here to fuck with you. Oh, you're walking through a hallway. I don't know, just make a scary fucking monster burst through the roof. That'll fuck him up. This game is just flat out mean sometimes. I wanna know what arsehole just randomly decided, oh, I know what'll be fun, let's just make a random item spawn a black hole that'll instantly cause the player to die upon being picked up. Isn't that fun? Are you guys having fun? Are you enjoying this game? And the worst thing is, yes, I am enjoying this game, because the combat is extremely entertaining, but god, this game has some messed up stuff. But something that's simultaneously messed up and very cool are the bosses. Now the bosses are for the most part quite difficult. You come across a couple that are fucking child's play, but a lot are not. You got fast guys, strong guys, big guys, little guys, the whole shebang. But the real messed up thing about a lot of these guys is the fact that if you die, you're getting set way back. Just add another shot to not die. But a game where this is taken to the extreme is Enter the Gungeon. I've already talked about this game in decent length, so I'll keep it brief. Enter the Gungeon's main component is if you die in the game, you die in real life. Not only that, but you get sent way back to the beginning of the game, which is annoying considering the game itself is quite difficult. Like, look at this. Do you know what's going on here? I don't. Pick me up, mum. I'm scared. You die a lot in this game. Realistically, it's only an hour-long game, but the difficulty makes that hour into, I don't know, 40 hours? Maybe even more, just to beat this game. But thankfully, the game itself is super fun, and the fact that every playthrough you can find something new makes for a game that's pretty easy to come back to. Now, a type of game that realistically should be the worst thing in the world is pretty impressive in the fact that it's only like the second worst thing in the world, the first of which being Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival. But the type of game I'm talking about today is the type that specifically has bad controls. The most notable example of this is Octodad. Finally, a game for any kid that said to their parents, "Shit mum, I want to be an octopus." Octodad is a rejected idea for a Disney Channel original turned into a fully formed game. You play as an octopus pretending to be an ordinary father of two, but this all goes awry when his old arch nemesis, the sushi chef, finally tries to get his revenge. Can Octodad juggle not being skinned alive, and his family life? Find out in Octodad Deadliest Catch, only on the Disney Channel. See, it slots in so well as a Disney Channel movie. But where does the difficulty come from in this game? It all sounds pretty basic. Well, you're an octopus. And along with the sardine and the dinosaur, octopuses don't make for great land creatures. So the difficulty doesn't come from the game itself, it comes from the 5-inch piece of plastic you're holding in your hands, the controller. Now the controls in this being a bit whack doesn't sound too bad, but trust me, it gets real difficult real quick. The actions you're performing in this game aren't too hard. Getting married, grocery shopping, death. None of this is hard per se, but the slippery awkward controls makes it a whole lot worse. That combined with the fact that you're trying not to give away your whole octopus shtick, and this can be a pretty challenging game. Maybe not the hardest of the purposely bad controls genre, but it can make for a pretty challenging time. So what makes the controls so bad anyway? Well, the fact that you have to control every limb individually, which might not sound too bad, but remember, you're an octopus, which means you have tentacles, which means instead of having human arms and legs, you have big spindly noodle limbs. The only saving grace when it comes to the controls is the fact that, thankfully, you only have to use 4 out of your 8 octopus limbs to get around. but somehow Octodad's still a pretty fun game. And I believe that's helped by the fact that it doesn't take itself too seriously. And come to think of it, most hard games don't. You have the occasional Dark Souls every now and then that's just straight out depressing. But I mean, most of these hard games have one thing in common. Comedy. And I actually think I know what my invention was missing all this time. Yeah, it's comedy.
Hey guys, I'm back with my new and improved oven. It's the exact same as before, but now I've written a little joke that's sure to brighten up the day of anyone sticking their head in this oven. 2 muffins are sitting in an oven. One says, "Gee, it's getting hot in here." And the other says, "Oh my god, a talking muffin." Now I want to stick my head in here.